Amen. New year, new series. We're going to get back into the narrative of the scriptures. We started a while back in Genesis, and we're going to keep working our way through. We're going to get back into the story of Samuel and Kings. But I wanted to take an opportunity here at the beginning of the year to spend a little bit of time in the book of Proverbs. Proverbs is an interesting book. A very, very difficult book to preach. It's a book that I think is neglected to our great detriment. I think Proverbs is one of those books that you should spend more time in than you probably do. I know that's true for me. It's the nature of the book and what it offers. And so my dad was supposed to be preaching this morning. He's homesick. I told him he owes me two. So I had to, I'd been working ahead and trying to get ready, and so we're just going to dive in this morning. Is that okay with you? I want to do an introduction to the book of Proverbs so that we kind of know what it is that we're supposed to do with this book. And so I was kind of thinking, when I was in school ages and ages ago, and they told us to write a paper or research something, you would do the who, what, why, where, when, how. Did I say that right? I don't even know. Anyway, we'll get there. I've got notes. I'll be okay. That's how we're going to approach this text. And so I'm going to start by reading the prologue, the introduction to the book of Proverbs. It's found in chapter 1, verses 1 to 7. It says this: the Proverbs of Solomon, son of David, king of Israel. To know wisdom and instruction, to understand words of insight, to receive instruction in wise dealing, in righteousness, justice, and equity, to give prudence to the simple, knowledge and discretion to the young. Let the wise hear and increase in learning, and the one who understands obtain guidance. To understand a proverb and a saying, the words of the wise and their riddles. The fear of Yahweh, the fear of the Lord, is the beginning of knowledge. Fools despise wisdom and instruction. So this opening prologue to the book really sets and establishes what the book is about. So we're going to start by talking about who. Who is the book for and who wrote it? Now, in the prologue, it tells us who it's written for. In verse 4, it says, to give prudence to the simple, knowledge and discretion to the youth. Now, most of us probably aren't excited about being described as simple. English translation of Hebrew words and concepts can be a challenge because there's connotations. If we say somebody is simple, that's not super exciting. But the concept of this word is it's deeply tied to youth and innocence and naivete. It's not derogatory. It's not a put down. It says this is a book for people that don't know what's going on. And that is all of us, by the way. Like at some level, in certain circumstances, we are faced all the time with things we're like, I don't know. I don't know. If that's you, and let me say when that's you, the book of Proverbs is for you, right? To give prudence to the simple, knowledge and discretion to the youth, to the young, to those who are learning, those who are seeking, those who are trying to understand how to navigate the complexities of life. This book is for you. But verse 5 also says this: it is to let the wise hear and increase in learning. So there's areas of your life where you don't really have a clue. But then there are areas of your life where you've learned some stuff along the way. Now, one of the dangers of learning some stuff along the way is that we think we've got it all figured out. I hope this isn't a spoiler for you, but you don't have it all figured out. There's more to learn. There's more knowledge and discernment and wisdom out there than what you currently possess. So this really covers all the bases. Like if you're new to life, if you're new to something, Proverbs has something for you. If you're a little seasoned and you've learned a little bit along the way, there's still something for you in the book of Proverbs. It is there for all of us in whatever season of life we might find ourselves in. Now, who wrote it? Well, it tells us right at the beginning, the Proverbs of Solomon, son of David, king of Israel. Now, it actually tells us in the book there's three other authors that contribute. Hezekiah has some of his scribes. There's a guy named Agur. There's another guy named Lemuel that contribute. But Solomon is stated at the beginning as the collector and the organizer of this book. And some of you may have read through it and you're like, it doesn't seem all that organized. Partially right, but there is some organization. But Solomon is credited as the one that compiled and organized these Proverbs together. And that makes sense with what we know about Solomon, David's son, king of Israel. When he first inherited the kingship, God came to him with an offer. Ask of me anything that you want, and I'll grant it to you. And he responded, I want wisdom. I want wisdom. And so, like in 1 Kings chapter 4, verse 29, it says this: God gave Solomon wisdom and understanding beyond measure, and breadth of mind like the sand on the seashore. That's a great phrase. I feel like I have breadth of mind of a puddle. But God gave Solomon this insane wisdom. It says Solomon's wisdom surpassed the wisdom of all the people of the East and all the wisdom of Egypt. And he was wiser than all other men, wiser than Ethan the Ezrahite. Y'all know him, right? And Heman and Calcol and even Darda, right? The sons of Mahol. His fame was in all the surrounding nations. I love so I mean, we could contextualize this. Like, I don't know who you think is smart, right? But Solomon would have been beyond that. So it says that he spoke 3,000 proverbs, and his songs were 1,005. He spoke of trees from the cedar that is in Lebanon to the hyssop that grows out of the wall. He spoke also of beasts and of birds and of reptiles and of fish. And people of all nations came to hear the wisdom of Solomon, and from all the kings of the earth who had heard of his wisdom. See, Solomon is the fountain of the Jewish wisdom tradition. He asked for wisdom, he received it, he wrote and spoke and compiled and organized. He wanted to pass on wisdom. After Solomon, in the nation of Israel, schools would develop that would teach the wisdom of Solomon, the wisdom that Solomon had received himself, the wisdom that Solomon had gathered, and that's what we find in the book of Proverbs. So that tells us a little bit about where and when. It was started in the lifetime of Solomon. It would have been completed and over time. We have additions at the end from Hezekiah's time and later. So the where and when is in the ancient Near East. And so I mention that simply so that I can say something that I say a lot and that I love to say. The Bible is written for us, but it's not written to us. So we don't get to pick up the book of Proverbs and read it through the lens of our modern American scientific worldview. That's not how it was written. That's not who it was written to. Solomon compiled this ancient collection of wisdom in the ancient Near East. And so it's not surprising that it looks very, very similar to a lot of the ancient wisdom that we have from the ancient Near East. We have stones and inscriptions and collections of wisdom from ancient Egypt and Babylon and other ancient cultures, and they look very, very similar to what we find in the book of Proverbs. And some people, that freaks them out. It's like, oh, why would it look? Well, why wouldn't it look like the culture of its day? Solomon, I mean, even in that text that I read from Kings, like Solomon's wisdom tradition takes place in the ancient Near East among the traditions of the East and of Egypt and Sumer, Samaria, and Babylon and Persia. It's in the mix. Of course, God is going to communicate to and through Solomon in the contextual reality of his day. But there is a significant difference between the Jewish wisdom literature and the wisdom literature of the other ancient Near Eastern cultures. And that is that it's deeply rooted in their relationship to Yahweh, to their covenant God. We'll talk more about that here in a little bit. But now let's talk a little bit about what it is. It's a collection of proverbs. And what is a proverb? A proverb is a insight, an observation, or advice that is so generally accepted it becomes assumed as truth. They're truisms, just statements of reality that resound in their culture to the point that they can end an argument, right? They're just statements of reality that resonate within the culture. They're not, however, universal truths. And I'm gonna unpack that because that's significant. They're not true in every situation. They're true when applied to the right situation in the right way. Life is too complex for simple or simplistic formulas. So if we look at the Proverbs as these, I think of it as magical thinking, right? Oh, here, I've got a proverb. This is going to fix everything. We're looking at it wrongly. So we have proverbs in our culture, right? The simple observations that we all know that resonate with us. You can't judge a book by its look before you. Right? These are proverbs, right? Like, these are things that we go, oh yeah, that makes sense, right? Like, yeah, I should look before I leave, right? Like these are things that resonate within us, and so that's what the Proverbs are. They are these. It's a compilation of insights and advice and wisdom about how to live life skillfully. How to live life skillfully. See, when we think of the word wisdom in our culture, we tend to think primarily in the intellectual realm. Wise people are really smart. But in the Hebrew tradition, wisdom is a word of skill and action. The first references to people of wisdom in the scriptures are tradespeople. God gave them wisdom and skill to build and create the tabernacle, the temple. Like this wisdom is not simply intellectual knowledge, although of course it can and must at times include knowledge. But wisdom is about skill. It's about navigating through the complexities of life in a way that gets you to the end that you desire. That's what the Proverbs are. So how do we read the Proverbs? First of all, we have to read them as what they are. They're poetic. and we don't read poetry the way that we read prose. Right? So you don't read Proverbs the way that we read Genesis or Deuteronomy. We don't read it the way that we read the law or the Torah. We don't read it the way that we read the historical narratives, because that's not what it is. It's poetic at its core. It doesn't always seem poetic to us because Hebrew poetry is really different than ours. It works in parallelism and repetition, and if it doesn't rhyme, it's not really poetry to most of us in our culture. But it is poetic at its core. And poetic writing, poetic literature is not precise by design, right? It's evocative, it's symbolic, it's representative, and like any poetic literature, you can't take it too far. It's not designed to do that. So we read it as it is. And see, I think that's why so many people have a challenge with reading the book of Proverbs, is that we're not very good or used to reading things poetically. And so we come across things in the book of Proverbs that really challenge us or startle us. It seems, well, there's so many places in the book of Proverbs that are flat out contradictory if we're not reading it poetically. Let me give you a couple of examples. Proverbs 26, verse 4 says, "Answer not a fool according to his folly, lest you be like him yourself." That sounds like some good advice. So you see some foolish person getting all irate and all upset, and maybe you should tape this to your computer monitor so you don't respond on Facebook, right? Like, answer not a fool according to his folly, lest you be like him yourself. Which reminds me of one of my favorite proverbs. It's better to remain silent and be thought a fool than open your mouth and remove all doubt, right? Like that. So here's this just simple, practical advice. You hear that and you go, yeah, that makes sense. That sounds like something that would be good for me in my life, to not get drawn into foolish arguments with foolish people. And then the very next verse says, "Answer a fool according to his folly, lest he be wise in his own eyes." And we go, well, which one is it? Right? And see, that's the point. This is not magical thinking. This is not a command from the Lord. This is not instruction in that way. This is wisdom literature. The reality is sometimes you're going to have to keep quiet and not respond to a fool, and other times you're going to have to open your mouth and respond to the fool. It's like wisdom is knowing that sometimes you got to do one thing and sometimes you got to do the other, and then you need wisdom to know when to use which one and which fool to answer or not to. Right? Like that's the reality. Like let's take another example. Proverbs 10:22. "The blessings of Yahweh makes rich." Oh, this just hits the American prosperity gospel, right? The blessings of Yahweh makes rich, and he adds no sorrow with it. So if you know the Lord and if you trust the Lord, then man, you're going to be rich. Right? And of course, so riches do come from the Lord. Everything comes from the Lord, right? So there is this reality, though. It's talking about how does God look at us? What does God want to give us? How does God treat us? And we can look at this and go, the blessing of the Lord makes rich, and he adds no sorrow with it. But then we go to Proverbs 28:6, and it says, "Better is a poor man who walks in his integrity than a rich man who is crooked in his ways." Right? And so, like, Proverbs resists the oversimplification of life. Life is complex. And we have this crazy tendency to oversimplify things. Oh, wealth comes from the Lord, so therefore if you're wealthy, then you must be good and God must be blessing you. I was like, well, sometimes. And sometimes there's ill-begotten gains. Sometimes it's better to be poor and righteous than wealthy and unrighteous, right? Like, so we can't read the book of Proverbs like it's offering us this simplified promise of how to get what we want, right? Like, our Proverbs work the same way, right? So we get look before you leap, right? Look before you leap. That's one of our Proverbs. But he who hesitates is lost. Well, which one is it? Well, it depends. Like, they're both true. And it just depends on, like, there are certain situations where you really should look before you leap. And there are other situations where if you hesitate, it's done. You miss it. Right? How about this? Opposites and birds of a feather stick together, flock together. Right? Well, which one is it? Yes. Right? Like, that's how this works. It's how this works. You can't judge a book by its, and clothes make the man. Well, which one is it? Yes. You see where we're going here. Like, there's this deep tendency I've seen within modern culture and in modern evangelicalism to make everything black and white and simple. Now, the only problem with that is everything. Because life is anything but simple. It is complex and complicated. And as much as we'd like an easy button, remember those commercials? Like, we just want an easy button. And sometimes people want to treat the Proverbs like an easy button. Oh, if I could just find the right Proverbs. Oh, if I could just find the right verse. Oh, if I could just write, then everything. That is not what the Proverbs are about. They're not magic. They're not promises. I want to spend a little bit of time here, and I might make some of you a little bit uncomfortable, and I'm cool with that. So let's just do this, all right? So there's a tendency to try to treat the Proverbs like they're promises in the same way that other promises in the Scripture function. But the Proverbs aren't promises. But you've probably heard it and thought this way about some of the Proverbs. I thought I'd choose the most common one that I've heard. Proverbs 26:7. Train up a child in the way he should go, and even when he's old, he will not depart from it. So I've heard people proclaim this and pray this and preach this as if it's a promise. And so it works like this. So if I train my child in righteous things, if I raise them in the church and I do it right, then it's guaranteed that when they're old, they're going to walk with Jesus and everything's going to turn out okay. Now, of course, life doesn't work that way. And what happens is then you're just constantly full of anxiety and guilt and doubt. If our kid doesn't do what we think might be righteous or isn't walking in the way that we tried to train them to, we think, well, I guess I didn't do it right, or I guess I didn't do enough, or now it becomes my fault. And so, and I've seen and talked and counseled with people say, I claim this, I did everything right, and they're not walking with the Lord, so the Bible's not trustworthy, and God let me down. Like, I'm really sorry that you feel that way, but the Bible is trustworthy, and God didn't let you down. You were just taking something in Scripture that wasn't a promise and trying to claim it as a promise. It's not the way it works. It's simple wisdom that when applied correctly. Okay, here's the deal. If you want your kid to live and walk in a certain way, the best odds that you have of that happening are to actually train them in that way. Right? Like, so many of the Proverbs are literally no duh moment, right? Like, but sometimes we need the no does, right? Like, okay, so like if you want your kid to live in a certain way, Train them in that way. You got a way better shot that they're going to live that way if you train them in that way. If you don't train them in the way, the chances of them living that way are significantly diminished. Right? This is not a promise. This is insight. It's not guaranteed. It's about probabilities and realities. Life is complex, and people have freedom. Proverbs understands that. You could be the best parent that's ever existed and do all the right training in all the right ways, and there's still no guarantee. Does that mean that we shouldn't train? Does that mean that we should abandon it? Of course not. So life's complex. I want my kid to live a certain way. I'm going to do the best that I can. At the end of the day, I'm going to understand it's up to them who they're going to be, what they're going to do. This is not a promise. Proverbs aren't promises. Doesn't mean that they're not true. Doesn't mean that they're not useful. It just means that we have to engage them with wisdom, right? The wisdom of Proverbs must be read with wisdom. So there's a couple of Proverbs that speak about this. Proverbs 26:7 says, like a lame man's legs, which hang useless, is a proverb in the mouth of fools. That's so visual. It's it'd probably be canceled today for writing it that way. Let's be honest. But it's like drawing out this. Do you see what he's saying? You may know a proverb. You may have it in your mouth. But if you don't know how to apply it, what is it? It's useless. That's what he's saying. The Proverbs in and of themselves, if not handled rightly, if not exercised with wisdom, are useless. It actually gets worse than that. Proverbs 26:9. Like a thorn that goes up into the hand of a drunkard is a proverb in the mouth of fools. Not only are the Proverbs useless to a fool, but Proverbs mishandled will create more problems and more pain. And so the question of how do we engage and read and study and meditate on and use the Proverbs? Well, we have to do it with wisdom. And this is where Proverbs stands unique among all the ancient wisdom literature of the ancient Near East, in that it's rooted in the covenant relationship between Yahweh, God, and his people. And so the key to Proverbs is found in verse 7 in the prologue. We read it. The fear of Yahweh is the beginning of knowledge. Fools despise wisdom and instruction. This gets repeated multiple times throughout the book, restated in different ways. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, Proverbs chapter 9. Wisdom, knowledge, instruction, skill. The Hebrew literature, all these words, they all form together this simple central idea of living skillfully, of navigating through the complexities of life in relationship to Yahweh. The fear of the Lord. And here again, we're back to our challenges with the English language. This concept of the fear of Yahweh. Fear has such a wide semantic range in English. It can mean anything from reverence and respect to absolute horror and wetting your pants, right? Like that. So it's so we get this word with this wide range, and you kind of need the context to then figure it out. And then we get these statements. Well, the fear of the Lord is beginning wisdom. It's well, am I supposed to be terrified of God? That's going to make me wise? Or is it on the reverence side? Spoiler alert, it's on the reverence side. Right? The fear of the Lord is an acknowledgement of God's character and God's nature and God's power and God's skill and God's wisdom. And when you recognize who God is, the creator of the universe, not just the creator, but the sustainer of the universe, the one who designed this world to function in its unbelievable beauty and complexity, the only sane and rational response to that is awe. To fear the Lord, to stand back in amazement, to go, you're better. You're bigger. You're smarter. I'm made in your image, but I'm not you. And I not only want to be like you, but I need you in my life. The fear of the Lord is the right response to encounter with God. Because he is bigger and better. He is greater and more glorious. And so, like, when we understand that reality, there is a creator, there is a sustainer, and that he is relational, and that he is loving and generous, and that he has called us and created us for a purpose, and that he is inviting us to walk and live with him, that changes how we approach life. So for the Hebrew in the time of Solomon, for the Christian today, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. There's no wisdom for the Christian outside of that fundamental relationship. Now, again, you can't press this too far. It's not saying that there's no wisdom of people that don't know Yahweh. It's not saying that non-Christians, non-believers, atheists have zero wisdom. That's not what he's saying at all. He's saying, for those of us that know and follow Yahweh, if you don't have the fear of Yahweh at the core and the center and the foundation of who you are, you don't even get to start on the path of wisdom. So for us, that's everything. And so what that means is that as we read and reflect, as we meditate and memorize, as we integrate the truths and the wisdom of Proverbs into our lives, we have to do it relationally. We have to do it prayerfully. Because if we need to approach the wisdom literature with wisdom, the first step is to go, God, I need you to help me. See, that's the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. Lord, I got a fool in my life. I need you to help me discern whether I keep my mouth shut or whether I call him out. I need your help. See, for the follower of Yahweh, wisdom is relational. It's not mere abstract intellectual. It's relational. And so we need to think about the wisdom of Proverbs, not just in a practical way, but in a theological way. The Proverbs are deeply and profoundly theological. In fact, next week I want to talk about how do the Proverbs point us to Jesus. And it's amazing. Okay? I'm not saying my sermon will be amazing. I'm the way that Proverbs does it. I'm going to do my best. But I want to lay it out because it's theological. And then what we're going to do, because you don't preach Proverbs sequentially. I want to take advantage of being in Proverbs for a while to talk about our core values as a church. So we're going to talk about what do Proverbs have to say about identity. And then we'll spend a week thinking about what do the Proverbs have to say about community and relationship. And then talk about humility, and then lastly, the idea of journey, being on mission. So that's where we're going to go in this series. And repeated throughout will be this reality that the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, the beginning of knowledge. Without it, the Proverbs can be either useless or dangerous. We want them to be practical, and productive. Last but certainly not least, we ask ourselves this morning, why? Why should we spend time in the Proverbs? I really want to challenge you to spend more time in the book of Proverbs this year than you have in the past. And, man, the why question is really so simple. We need wisdom. I've met most of you. I know the world that we live in. We need wisdom. We got to stop pretending like we got it figured out. We have deep and profound insight and understanding of what's going on. I think it's pretty clear. Most of us are doing the whole fake it till you, right? See how? We need wisdom. God has given us this treasure house. But we got to seek it out. We got to plumb its depths. We've got to not just acknowledge it, but we got to take it in. Ponder it. Let it seep into us. And then intentionally acknowledge and invite God into that process of giving us wisdom and discernment, of knowing how to wisely use the wisdom that God gives us. The why is so straightforward, but I thought I'd end in Ephesians chapter 5, verses 15 to 17. It says, then, look carefully then how you walk. So Paul loves this metaphor of walking, life as walking. Where did Paul get that? I think he got it from the Proverbs. So one of the central themes that plays itself out through the Proverbs is the idea of a path. There's a path of the wise and there's a path of the fool. And over again in the book of Proverbs is going to call us to consider which path we're walking on. So Paul has this, he's steeped in the scriptures. And so it's not surprising to me that he says, hey, pay attention. Be careful how you walk, how you live. Look at which direction you're going to. Consider the end destination that you're trying to arrive at. Look carefully then how you walk, how you live, not as unwise, but as wise. We are all called to live in wisdom. It's not something we get to let ourselves off the hook, right? Oh, that guy's wise. I'm not so wise, right? I'm just a simple man. No, listen. We're all called to walk through the same battlefield and minefield of this world that we live in that's still so broken and denigrated by sin and death. And we're called to shine as a light in the darkness. And if we're going to shine as a light in a world as dark as this, we need profound amounts of wisdom. You don't get to walk through this life following Jesus on cruise control. Jesus isn't the easy button. Actually, walking and following Jesus is going to bring a whole other level of complexity and challenges to how you live and walk. So we need wisdom because we're called not to live as unwise, but as wise, making the best use of the time. I like the NAS translation, making the most of every opportunity. So you need wisdom for all of that. We have an almost infinite amount of possibilities in front of us, of opportunities, of how we're going to live our lives, how we're going to spend our days, what we're going to aim for, what we're going to try to, how we're going to live our lives, right? We have all, it's like, hey, if you want to make the most of every opportunity, if you're going to make the best use of your time, you need wisdom. We need wisdom. And we need to make the use of time because the days are, what does it say? Days are evil. You feel that? So therefore, it's like sometimes I read this stuff, I'm like, thanks, Paul. Therefore, do not be foolish, but understand what the will of the Lord is. Yeah, that's what I'd like. That's what we're all called to. Well, in order to not be foolish, in order to understand what the will of the Lord is, I think it makes sense that we should take advantage of that which God has given us to make us wise. And that's what the book of Proverbs is. It's God's gift to us to help us grow in wisdom. I hope you know that you can do that. Let me say it better. I hope you know that God can do that. That you can be more wise tomorrow than you are today. That if by God's grace we're here together at the beginning of 2026, that you could sit in this room a year from now significantly wiser than you are today. Like, that's the opportunity that's before us. The only question is, will we avail ourselves of that which God has given us? Will we intentionally and prayerfully enter into the relationship with wisdom? Let the fear of the Lord call to us and drive us to engage the wisdom literature that God has given us in Proverbs. May God make us wise for our good, for his glory. Amen?